We do want to talk about the Israel-Hamas war and the latest iteration in phase one of the hostage ceasefire deal. Remember, we reported that a top Hamas leader says that the militant group will release 6 living Israeli hostages Saturday and the bodies of 4 others. Now, there was some contradictory claims. Hamas was saying that included in the remains of the hostages were the Bibas children, and we've been covering the Bibas' family's plight for so long here. Now, the family came out with their own separate statement saying they're not going to believe Hamas at face value, saying they're going to wait for the weekend to see whether or not included in the 6 Israeli living hostages are their 2 children and the Bibas mother, of course. And so they are remaining hopeful, and they're not giving up. That was in a statement put out by the family just today here. In the meantime, we do want to bring into the conversation national security analyst and expert and retired Marine intelligence officer Hal Kempfer and the president for Union for Reform Judaism, Rabbi Rick Jacobs. They join me. And gentlemen, thanks for being with us here. Rabbi, I'm going to start with you. What the Bibas family has gone through for now more than 500 days is unimaginable, but still they are holding out hope that these 2 young children and the mother of this family will walk out of Gaza come the weekend. Are you hopeful that that can happen or not?
Andrew, this has been beyond excruciating. We observed 500 days of their captivity yesterday evening in Tel Aviv. This family has become really the symbol of all the hostages. This mother, Shiri, with her 2 young children, Kfir and Ariel, their bright red hair, and trying to imagine, we have these pictures of them being taken into Gaza and thinking, how in the world are they going to endure? Shiri's husband, Yarden, came out just a little while ago, not knowing the fate of his wife and 2 children. It's excruciating. They are entitled to as much hope as they can muster. But this is just, such a blow, because I think as every Israeli, every person of conscience who's been following the story of all the hostages and the brutal conditions under which they've been kept, the Bibas family has been that symbol of the family of the hostages. And to bring them home is a sacred commitment. They may, in fact, come home on Thursday. Their remains, we join the hope that maybe there's some possibility they'll come home alive, but every indication is that they won't.
I mean, Hal, you and I have talked about this so often, that the tall order Hamas was going to have to provide during these ceasefire talks and now during the ceasefire itself was a list of the living hostages and the dead hostages here. What are they doing here with this, frankly, I'm going to say, game on the world stage? Don't they know who they're going to give this weekend?
Well, Andrew, they're gaming it a lot. They're throwing out the numbers, but we're going to find out. I mean, I hate to. I want to say I'm hopeful that this will happen. I'm hopeful that we will see the Bibas family, remains are part of the transfer that comes forth, and of course, it's good to see them saying that they're going to send, release 6 hostages. They're actually moving ahead of the deadline. But then you have to put this in context of everything else. Hamas is desperate to try and get phase 2 implemented. That's still very much in the negotiation stage. And so they're accelerating things because they're trying to do something, even though they don't seem to have certainly all the data, shall we say, the information that is required. They're trying to push this forward as much as they can because they're trying to get that phase 2 deal in. And actually, they've even talked about releasing, this is just an offer, but they've talked about releasing all the remaining living hostages up front if a phase 2 deal is reached. That's a pretty substantial offer, although you have to look at everything else they want in phase 2 as well. And the problem with that is, if they do that, the way it kind of rolls out, you don't see where Hamas ceases to be a governing entity in Gaza, and that's the big problem. The big problem is, how do you get to those end state goals, even with this offer of releasing all the remaining hostages up front if there is a phase 2?
Can you remind us, though, what is in phase 2? What's on the table there?
Well, obviously, you have to release the hostages. That's part of it. And, of course, that's where they will complete the exchange, if you will, for hostages for Palestinians. All the remains of hostages who died that are left will certainly be transferred as well, or at least should be transferred. But it does require a withdrawal of the IDF from Gaza. And the problem is, if the IDF, if the Israeli Defense Forces withdraw from Gaza, what replaces them? What becomes the security force on the ground? Right now, there is nothing out there. There is no Arab proposal from Jordan, Egypt, Saudi Arabia to put a force in there of peacekeepers. Right now, it's very clear there won't be the Palestinian Authority going in there as some sort of peacekeeping element or peace enforcement element, I should say. So the question is, what do you have left? And what you have left is what you see now, which is Hamas, which is not an acceptable situation. It's not acceptable to Israel, of course, not acceptable to the United States. And frankly, when you get into it, it's not acceptable to Jordan, Egypt, or any of the Arab countries either. They don't want to see Hamas governing Gaza either. So there, phase two, there's a lot of things that are, the good part is you get back all the hostages. The bad part is, what are you left with Gaza?
Sure.
And there's not a lot to work with there if the IDF pulls out completely.
Yeah, of course, Rabbi and Hal, I've spoken with you separately so often on the post-war picture. What does the Gaza Strip look like? And Rabbi, you and I don't think, have spoken since Donald Trump took the oath of office January 20th and kind of injected into the conversation of this war quite a novel, creative, controversial idea for the United States to have some role in rebuilding the Gaza Strip, in dominating or owning the Gaza Strip, but without U.S. troops on the ground. And so we're still talking about that very idea, yes, theoretically here. I just wanted to get your thoughts. How is your community, how are those in Israel also responding still to this day to that very idea put forth by President Trump? Are they taking it still seriously or no?
So I think it varies, but I have to say that there is widespread feeling among the hostage families and among Israelis, really across the spectrum, and that is that these hostages are going free because of Donald Trump. Steve Witkoff, his emissary, has been a unbelievable force, and even Keith Siegel, who was just recently released, made a video just a couple of days ago, and he expressed his gratitude to the U.S. president. He said, "I would not be free, and the other hostages would not be free." Now, no matter someone's political ideology, you have to acknowledge that he is responsible for unjamming the system, and that is something that he deserves enormous credit for. However, I believe that the proposal around Gaza is just, yes, we need out-of-the-box thinking, but this is just untenable to imagine that you're going to either force Palestinians from Gaza. There are no Arab countries that want to take in 2 million Palestinians. Now, people say, well, he's also bringing new thinking. Well, I'm all for new thinking, but it's got to be moral thinking. It's got to be based in reality. And I think Israelis are a little bit confused at the moment. Let me just get back to phase two. It's important to understand phase two, that bringing the war to an end is the key element of phase two. It also is the relief of all the hostages. Right. There are many Israelis, the majority of Israelis say they need the hostages home. They understand, just as Hal just explained, that not having Hamas in any role in Gaza is really desirable, maybe required. But if that is going to be the thing that is the only way to get those hostages home, Israelis, and I think people, certainly in the Jewish community here in North America, we think we have to bring them home. That is a sacred commitment. I've been meeting with these families since a couple of days after October 7th, and it is just unimaginable that this phase two would not happen, and we will not see any more release of hostages. That's just untenable.
Yeah, I also just kind of have to personally remind myself, the word ceasefire is temporary definitionally. The war, yes, paused if any violations of the ceasefire happen, and there have been allegations of violations from both sides. The war will pick back up and it will continue here. Hal, I want to ask, though, about phase one in particular. Are you surprised it has held this long here? And to Rabbi Jacobs's point, are we putting the cart before the horse, so to speak, with the Gaza after the war conversation when the ceasefire is holding, yes, but it's still just a temporary ceasefire?
Well, Andrew, to the first part, yes. Frankly, I was very dubious if this thing was going to hold from the very beginning, and it has held. Now, we hit a real intractable position where the Hamas, over a week ago said, no, we're not going to release the hostages as scheduled. And of course, that's when the rhetoric got turned up a lot. All hell breaking loose was the promised outcome if they didn't. And, President Trump weighed in very heavily with very forceful language. Certainly, Prime Minister Netanyahu did. And of course, the release did happen. Hamas relented and did that. So it has been holding. And of course, this is a very positive note. But as far as the cart before the horse, part of what Hamas is reportedly offered release the hostages up front, but they also want to be a permanent peace agreement. The problem is, and that puts Bibi Netanyahu in a real bind, because if it's a permanent peace agreement, it's a permanent peace agreement that keeps Hamas as a governing entity. It keeps Hamas as a paramilitary force. It keeps Hamas as a potential threat to Israel, and that goes against everything that has been said since October 7th. The goals of Israel, and certainly everyone in Israel wants to see the hostages back. With that said, they don't want to see, nobody wants to see Hamas governing, and the Arab states don't want to see Hamas governing. They may not say it as loudly, but that's how they feel. So I don't know if it's putting the cart before the horse. Hamas has put this as one big package, and now Israel has to figure out what to do, and the U.S. has to look at this as well. And frankly, the Arab states have to look at this as well and figure out, okay, where do we go from here? And at some point, which is very likely, it's either going to be accepted or turned down. I'm thinking that as it's currently structured, it may be turned down, or at least turned down in part, but we'll see where that goes. I'm not holding my breath on phase two coming in as scheduled. It could happen, but I'm not holding my breath.
Rabbi Jacobs, final thoughts, last word there. Do you agree with that assessment by Hal, that sentiment?
Well, we're missing a key piece of the puzzle here. If phase two goes into effect, it's likely to topple the current Israeli government.
Yeah.
The right wing of Prime Minister Netanyahu's coalition has made it very clear that if they don't rid Gaza of Hamas, that there's no way that they stay in this government. So that's a pretty big piece of this. And I don't know that the Prime Minister is willing to literally have his government collapse. Let's also say that the reason this ceasefire went into effect is because Steve Witkoff, President Trump's emissary in the region, went into Prime Minister Netanyahu's office on Shabbat, something that they don't usually do, and basically said, you're going to accept this ceasefire. The president wants it. It's a critical statement. So the unknown here is, frankly, what is President Trump's ability to move this maybe in a way that he sees as necessary, but it may be against some of Bibi Netanyahu's short-term political strength. That's a pretty tough calculation to ask, but it's surely the case that this president is going in with a rather different approach. And I think if anybody knows exactly how it's going to end, they're basically creating that in their mind. We don't know how this moves, but lives are at stake. The most urgent moral issues, I think, for the Jewish people in the state of Israel is get our hostages home and create a next chapter, but there can't be a next chapter without these hostages.
All right, Hal Kempfer, Rabbi Rick Jacobs, we're going to leave it at that. We appreciate your time tonight, and we'll talk soon.